They thought him slow. A quiet man who skinned beaver and sold pelts. A man who limped, who rarely spoke more than 2 words in town. But the truth was buried under layers of solitude and scars. That trapper had once ridden with legends, until the day he walked away from war. They took his silence for weakness, until they burned what little peace he had. That night, the quiet man became a name whispered in fear. They never knew, until it was too late. He was the deadliest shot west of the Rockies. The wind never stopped in Dry Hollow. It crept through cracked windows and coiled beneath coat collars like a whisper of things long dead. Dust clung to every surface, and the sun hung low like a tired eye watching the last breath of a town too small to matter and too proud to vanish. A single crooked street cut through the place like a scar. One saloon, one general store, one half-sleeping sheriff's office, and a church missing half its shingles. Somewhere behind it all, tucked between the rusted cliffs and dry riverbeds, lived the trapper. Elijah Knox had called the canyon home for 15 years. He came down once every 2 weeks, limping beside a mule loaded with skins and meat. He rarely spoke unless bartering, and when he did, his voice was deep, dry, and measured. Folks didn't ask questions. The children stared, sometimes throwing stones when he passed. The grown-ups offered tight nods or averted glances. He lived alone. No friends, no past. Just a scar running down his neck and a look in his eye like he'd seen too much and said too little. Clara Jennings didn't see him the same way. She ran the general store with sleeves rolled up and a revolver under the counter she hadn't touched since burying her husband. Every time Elijah came in, she greeted him with a soft smile that lingered longer than it should have, and words meant to remind him he wasn't invisible. "Cold up there, I reckon," she'd say, handing over a sack of flour or a tin of coffee. "Colder some days," he'd reply, almost too quietly. She noticed things the others didn't. How he handled everything with care. How his eyes scanned every room like he was counting exits. And once, just once, when he reached to pay, the sleeve of his coat slipped back to reveal a faded tattoo. A cavalry sigil, long since outlawed. The town hadn't known trouble in years, but that was changing. Word had spread on whiskey breath and wagon trails. The Red Ridge riders were coming through the low country, burning out settlements that didn't bend and butchering the ones that did. Kane Booker and his men were the kind of outlaws that rode with laughter in their throats and fire at their backs. There were whispers in Dry Hollow, wives pulling children inside early, fathers dusting off old rifles, the preacher locking the church doors with shaky hands. Sheriff Greeley held a town meeting that lasted 12 minutes and ended with a shrug. "We ain't got the men," he said, "and I ain't got the stomach." No one blamed him. Kane Booker was more myth than man. His name had spread faster than telegrams, and where he rode, blood followed. Still, there was unease in the air, thick and tight like the calm before a lightning storm. That evening, just past sundown, a boy named Rory caught a glimpse of something no one else had seen. He'd wandered up the canyon edge, chasing a lizard with a slingshot in hand. The trapper's cabin sat quiet in a bend of pines and rock. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Rory crept closer, curiosity blooming in his chest like wildfire. Through a crack in the boarded window, he saw Elijah, seated by lantern light. He wasn't mending traps or boiling pelts. He was cleaning a rifle. Not just any rifle, a long, dark thing with silver inlays and a polished walnut stock. The kind of weapon you didn't bring down bears with. The kind made for precision, for war. Elijah moved with a calm grace, fingers working oil and cloth like he'd done it 1,000 times in his sleep. When he lifted the barrel to the light, Rory caught his breath. Etched along the side were 4 letters. USMC, barely visible beneath the years. The boy backed away without a sound, heart pounding. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Elijah felt the boy's eyes before he saw the shadow. He paused, stared at the window, then went back to cleaning. It didn't matter anymore. The riders were close. He could feel it in the stillness of the birds, in the way the coyotes kept their distance from the canyon rim. The land knew before people did. Later that night, the wind rose. It howled through the canyon like a warning, rattling the loose boards of the trapper's cabin. Elijah sat alone, fire crackling low. He held a bullet in his fingers, turning it slowly. Clara's voice echoed faintly in his mind. She'd once told him, "Some men bury pain, others become it." He didn't know which one he was anymore. In town, lanterns were dimmed early, doors locked, guns loaded, though most hands shook holding them. Clara stood in the back of her shop, staring at a photograph of her husband, a stern man with sun-worn eyes and a stiff mustache, killed by bandits on the road to Abilene 6 years ago. She set the photo face down. In the hills, 10 miles east, Kane Booker and the Red Ridge Riders made camp. A dozen men, hardened, cruel. One stirred the fire with a branding iron shaped like a snake. They laughed about the last town that tried to resist. Booker spat into the flames and said, "Dry Hollow's next. We ride at dawn." And back in the canyon, the trapper rose from his chair, walked to the corner of the cabin, and slid away a floorboard. Beneath it lay a metal case, rusted but sealed. He opened it. Inside, a pair of pistols, matte black, pearl handles. He took a breath, long and steady, and closed the lid again. The time for silence was ending. They came just after noon, when the sun was highest and mercy was shortest. 12 riders, red dust coiling behind their hooves like smoke from a long-burning fire. At the front rode Kane Booker, a man wrapped in worn leather and darker reputation. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and his smile looked carved more than grown. Behind him, the Red Ridge Riders rolled in like a storm with no rain, only ruin. Dry Hollow froze. Doors slammed, curtains twitched. The preacher muttered scripture beneath his breath, and the sheriff reached for a bottle before he reached for his badge. Children were yanked inside by anxious hands. Only Clara Jennings stood still, her face set as stone behind the window of her shop, watching them come. The saloon's swinging doors slapped open under Booker's hand. He stepped inside like he owned it. His boots hit the floor with authority, the way men walk when they've never lost a fight. Inside, silence stretched taut. Cards dropped. A man coughed and tried not to choke on it. Booker turned in a slow circle, looking at the frightened eyes around him like a hawk surveying chickens. "Afternoon," he said, voice smooth, honey-coated death. "I'm told this town don't pay taxes." No one answered. "I hate ungrateful folk," he continued, loosening the belt that held a silver-handled revolver at his side. "So I'm setting up a little toll." He tossed a sack of coins onto the bar with a jangle. "Every shop, every farm, every week. That's the price of breathing now. You don't pay." He snapped his fingers and pointed at a man seated by the piano. "You burn." The man stood without a word and left his drink behind. Sheriff Greeley appeared a minute too late. He puffed up his chest and drew his pistol halfway before one of Booker's men cracked him in the temple with the rifle butt. Greeley hit the floor with a groan and didn't move again. Booker looked down at him with amusement. "That your lawman? Hell, I've seen better backbone in a snake." They laughed, the riders. Loud, ugly. The kind of laughter that stuck to the walls and stained the air. Clara saw the whole thing from her storefront. She didn't flinch. She stepped out and crossed the dusty road, the hard sun on her shoulders. Her hands trembled at her sides, but her voice didn't. "We don't want your kind here," she said, firm, clear. Booker turned. The rider stilled. He tilted his head. "Ain't that sweet? A woman with fire." He walked toward her slowly, hands loose. "Tell me, ma'am, you got a husband inside waiting to play hero?" "He's dead," she replied. Booker stopped. For a flicker of a moment, something like respect passed over his face. Then it soured. His hand snapped out, striking her across the cheek. She stumbled but didn't fall. "Then you ought to learn your place, widow," he said, and fast. From the far end of the street, a figure passed, dragging a sled of fur behind a tired mule. Elijah Knox didn't look up. He kept walking, slow and limping, toward Clara's store. The riders watched him with amusement. "Hey, hey," one of them called out, pointing. "Look at this old dog. You a hunter or a hound, friend?" Another chimed in. "Bet he traps rabbits with those bones. Don't look like he could trap air." Laughter. Raucous, cruel. Elijah stopped near the steps of the general store, eyes on the door. Clara stood nearby, her cheek red, her pride intact. Elijah looked at her, then at Booker. Their eyes met, but no one said anything. Then the trapper gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not to the outlaws, not to Clara, maybe just to the moment. He turned, led his mule around the back, and disappeared into the canyon road, without a word. The riders didn't follow. Booker watched him go, then turned back to his business. Set a fire by the church, he told one of his men. Let em know we're not just visiting. By sundown, flames licked the edge of the chapel's fence. The sky turned to blood. The wind carried smoke across the town. No one spoke during supper. Mothers cried quiet into their bread. The preacher stared at the scorched soil, like it had cursed his name. And miles away, where the cliffs closed tight around the trail like a fist, Elijah walked alone. His mule trailed behind, reins dragging, forgotten. The trapper's cabin crouched in shadow, swallowed in silence. Inside, he lit no lamp. He didn't need to see. His hands knew the way. Behind the cabin, beneath a withered tree, he knelt and began to dig. The earth was hard, but not unkind. It gave way slowly, like it remembered this touch. Minutes passed. The shovel struck metal. He cleared the dirt gently. A long, rusted box emerged, iron hinges, heavy lid. He carried it inside, placed it on the table, and opened it. Inside lay memory, untouched by time. A silver badge, its star dulled by age, but not forgotten. 2 pistols, identical, custom-forged. Their barrels long, grips carved from bone, initials etched into the frame. E.K. He held one in his hand. The weight settled against his palm like it never left. His thumb brushed the cylinder. It clicked once, then again, like a heartbeat returning. Elijah set the gun down, reached into the case again. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a photo. 3 men, younger, standing tall in Union blue. One of them smiled, Elijah, clean-shaven, bright-eyed. Another wore a marshal's badge. The third was already a ghost. He folded the photo, placed it in his pocket, then closed the lid. He didn't speak, but the silence said everything. The trapper wasn't gone. He had just remembered who he was. There was a time when Elijah Knox rode tall in the saddle and wore a star over his heart. Long before the limp, before the silence settled in his bones like winter frost, they called him the Whisper Shot. A Civil War sniper turned lawman. He never raised his voice, never needed to. His rifle spoke for him, and when it did, it only spoke once. After the war, he was offered anything, land, money, a captain's commission. But he chose the badge, not for power, but because too many men mistook peace for silence and evil for dust. He chased gangs across plains and deserts, cleaned out rustlers from Montana to Missouri. He was legend by 30, feared in outlaw circles, respected by marshals twice his age. A ghost in the hills, they'd say. You never heard the shot that killed you. Then came Avery Junction. He arrived late. Too late. He'd ridden 3 days without rest, chasing a lead on the Muldoon gang, a savage lot that burned what they couldn't steal. By the time he reached the town, the sky was already black with smoke. Women screamed. Children wept. Flames reached for the heavens as if trying to scorch away the stars. Elijah found his wife in the ashes of their home. Her hands were still wrapped around the cradle. There was no burial, nothing left to bury. He killed every last one of the Muldoons. Not in rage, but with ice in his veins. Tracked them to the edge of the Sangre de Cristos. Shot them one by one over 3 days. Left no graves. Only stories. Then he vanished. Badge buried, guns boxed. He limped away into the canyons. Took only his mule and his silence. Let the world forget him. But legends don't die. They only wait. The blaze reached Clara's shop just after midnight. Kane Booker had given the town until sundown to pay. They didn't or couldn't. It didn't matter. The riders returned with fire and laughter. They tossed lanterns into windows and smashed whiskey bottles against the walls, the flames licking them into life. Clara tried to save what she could. Threw blankets over the flames, kicked open the back door, dragged out a few crates of canned goods and her husband's old letters. Smoke bit her lungs. The roof collapsed minutes after she stumbled out, coughing, eyes red, one arm scorched from shoulder to wrist. Elijah saw it from the ridge. He didn't rush, didn't run. He stood in the dark, rifle in hand, and watched the orange glow consume the last good thing in Dry Hollow. He could have stopped them. Maybe. He didn't move. The town gathered in the morning, silent as graves. Clara sat on a bench outside the sheriff's office, wrapped in a singed blanket. Her hair was soot gray, her mouth set tight. The fingers of her right hand were blistered, the flesh raw. She didn't cry. Hadn't shed a tear since the riders left laughing into the dawn. When Elijah came down the hill, no one met his eyes. He approached her slowly, hat in hand, coat stained with trail dust. The townsfolk stepped back, unsure if they should watch or turn away. Clara looked up at him, her face streaked with ash, and said, "Why do you hide from who you are?" He didn't answer. "I saw the way you looked at them," she said, voice low, shaking. "Not like a victim. Not like the rest of us. You've seen men like that before. You fought them." His hands clenched. His throat tightened. You could have stopped them. Or tried. Still nothing. Tears welled but didn't fall. "Are you really just a trapper? Or are you something else, Elijah?" For a moment, the silence stretched so long it hurt. Then he reached into his coat and pulled something from the inside pocket. A folded photograph. He held it out, but she didn't take it. He left it on the bench beside her, turned, and walked away. The crowd parted as he passed. Some whispered. Some frowned. He didn't look back. That night, the canyon was quiet. No smoke rose from the chimney. The fire inside had gone cold. A small mule stood tethered by the door, swishing its tail, waiting for a master that would never return. By morning, the cabin was empty. Inside, a single piece of paper lay on the table beside the opened case. A silver star sat on top of it. The note read only 6 words. Asterisk, no more hiding. No more silence. Asterisk. The desert didn't sleep. It breathed, slow and dry, under the weight of twilight. Wind tugged at the mesquite trees, whispering through their brittle branches like a prayer too old to be heard. Somewhere beneath the cover of a high bluff, Elijah Knox lay still beneath a veil of dust and sagebrush, his rifle steady atop a bed of stone. One eye pressed to the scope, the other closed. Below him, the riders drank and laughed and cursed beside their campfire, oblivious. Their horses pawed the ground, restless. Sparks from the fire rose like embers from hell. Booker's men were bold in the dark, certain of their power. They'd grown fat on fear. Elijah didn't blink. He counted them, 11 now. He'd killed one the night before. A sentry, picked clean off a rock ledge with no sound but the quiet thump of a body hitting earth. No one had noticed until morning. Then another fell that afternoon, pissing in the wind behind a mesquite bush, a single shot through the back of his neck. Now the rest moved differently, nervous. Jokes didn't come as quick. Laughter had an edge. A man rose from the fire to stretch his legs. Elijah tracked him through the crosshairs. When the outlaw turned, exposing the buckle of his belt in the firelight, the trigger squeezed itself. The shot cracked like thunder. The rider dropped before his boots hit the ground. Panic. Men scrambled for cover, shouting into the darkness. Booker kicked over a whiskey jug and grabbed his revolver, cursing up at the stars. "Who the hell is out there?" he bellowed. "You come down here and face me, you coward." Elijah didn't move. He watched, waited. Booker spun in circles, eyes wide. "It's a ghost," one of his men whispered. "We ain't seen nothing. Just bodies fallin'." "Shut up," Booker snarled, but his voice cracked like a boy's. They didn't sleep that night. By the next morning, 2 more were dead, one while tying his saddle, the other while chewing on jerky. Both shot from unseen places, blood soaking into the dust before they could scream. Booker had had enough. He stormed into Dry Hollow with what was left of his men, rage boiling behind his pale eyes. The sheriff had already fled town with 2 deputies, but Booker didn't care about law. He cared about control, fear. So they took hostages. 3 women from the boarding house, 2 boys from the church steps. They dragged them into the town square, forcing the townsfolk to watch. Booker raised his voice like a preacher spitting fire. "You think one man can undo us? You think some spook with a rifle's gonna end the riders?" He yanked a boy forward, no older than 10, knees shaking. "Come for him, ghost." Let's see how dead men shoot with blood on their conscience. No one stepped forward. Only the wind answered, curling between buildings like a blade. Elijah watched from the shadows of a livery stable. His chest rose and fell slowly. His pulse didn't quicken. His hands didn't tremble. But his heart burned. That night, he moved like smoke, through back alleys, over rooftops, into corners no man had touched in years. He was wind and stone. He was silence sharpened. The hostages were locked in the church under guard. 2 riders sat on the steps, smoking, bored. They never saw him coming. 2 soft thuds. 2 bodies down. Elijah opened the doors. Clara was there, arm bandaged, cradling a weeping girl. Her eyes widened when she saw him, not in surprise, but recognition. He handed her a key, then a revolver. "Can you shoot?" he asked. Her answer was the sound of the hammer being cocked. He nodded once and vanished into the night. The storm had been building for days, hanging just beyond the horizon. Now it rolled in, slow and low, thunder mumbling its warnings as clouds swallowed the moonlight. Back in the canyon, Elijah lit a small lantern and opened the metal box. He cleaned his pistols with methodical grace, each movement deliberate, each breath measured. The rifle lay nearby, already oiled and loaded. Beside him sat a small block of lead and brass. He took a knife and began to carve. A single name, etched into the casing of one bullet. Clara. He held it in his palm, the weight of it heavy and righteous. "One shot for justice," he whispered. He loaded it into the chamber. "One shot for peace." He closed the cylinder. Outside, lightning licked the sky in jagged fingers. Thunder answered. Elijah didn't flinch. Tomorrow would bring reckoning. Tonight, he was ready. The sun stood straight overhead, a burning eye glaring down on Dry Hollow like it, too, wanted to see blood spilled. The air was still, choked with dust and silence. Every door was bolted. Every window watched. The town square had never been so quiet. Kane Booker stood in the center of it all, boots spread wide, the hostages at his feet. His pale eyes scanned the rooftops, the alleys, the faces peeking through cracks in the wood. His revolver spun idly in his hand, silver flashing in the cruel light. "You got 1 minute, Ghost," he barked, voice echoing off stone and shuttered glass. 1 minute before I start dropping bodies. Let's see if your legend's got legs." Beside him, the hostages trembled. Clara knelt next to the boy, whispering calm into his ear. Her face was set, bruised and cut, but her eyes held no fear, just fury. Kane kicked over a barrel and raised his pistol toward the first captive. Then Elijah stepped into the open. No limp, no mule, no disguise. Just a tall man in a long duster, his hat low, one rifle in his hands, slung casually at his hip like it didn't weigh more than a thought. The townspeople held their breath. Booker stared, blinking against the sunlight. "You," he said with a sneer. "You're the Ghost." Elijah stopped 10 paces from him. Dust swirled around his boots. "No," he said, voice steady. "Just me." Booker barked a laugh. "You're outnumbered. Outgunned. Hell, you brought 1 damn rifle." Elijah shrugged. "That's all I need." Booker's smile cracked wider, but his fingers twitched. "All right then," he growled. "Let's see what you got." A pistol came up fast. Elijah didn't move fast, he moved first. The crack of the rifle split the square in 2. Booker's gun flew from his hand before it could clear the holster, spinning into the air like a silver bird. A second shot snapped into the kneecap of the rider to Booker's right, sending him howling to the ground. Then another, ricocheting off the church bell into the chest of a man hiding behind the well. Screams broke out. The town erupted. The hostages scattered. Clara grabbed the small boy's arm and shoved him behind a barrel. An outlaw lunged for her, knife flashing. A pistol clattered to the dirt beside her, dropped by a dying man. Clara didn't hesitate. She picked it up with her burnt hand, blood soaking through the bandage, and fired. The man fell dead at her feet. Elijah moved like wind over the desert, methodical, silent, unrelenting. He didn't miss. Every shot found a mark. One bounced off a metal lamppost into the thigh of a man behind cover. Another passed clean through 2 enemies too foolish to separate. Chaos turned to panic. The riders broke formation. Cain ran. He bolted down the alley between the saloon and the livery, shoving past townsfolk and screaming for his horse. But Elijah was already in motion, long coat trailing like a shadow stitched to vengeance. He moved through gun smoke and screams with the patience of a man who had waited 15 years to pull the trigger. Cain climbed the rocky ridge behind town, panting, looking back with wide eyes. The desert stretched around him, unforgiving and endless. He turned and fired wildly down the path, bullets pinging off rocks, carving holes into dust. Elijah kept coming. They met at the top, where the ridge dropped into a yawning canyon. Cain spun and fired. The shot grazed Elijah's side, ripping through fabric and skin. Elijah stumbled. Cain grinned, raising his gun for the kill. But Elijah lifted his rifle calmly and pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Cain dead center in the chest. He dropped to his knees, revolver slipping from his hand. Blood spread across his vest like ink. Cain coughed once. "Who?" he rasped, eyes searching the sky. "Who are you?" Elijah stepped close. The wind caught his coat and lifted it like a banner. "Justice you never saw coming." Cain toppled backwards into the canyon. The silence that followed was complete. When Elijah returned to town, the people stood in the square stunned. The fire had gone from the riders. Those who hadn't fallen were already in chains or running toward the hills. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, pistol still in hand, her face streaked with soot and tears. Elijah paused in front of her. They didn't speak. She reached out and touched his coat, just above the wound. He winced. "I told you," she whispered. "You're not just a trapper." "No," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Then he turned and walked into the setting sun, a trail of blood behind him, the rifle in his hand still warm from the fire it had dealt. Dry Hollow breathed again. It happened slow, like spring creeping into a long-frozen valley. The blood had been washed from the streets, the charred remains of the church rebuilt, one beam at a time, by hands that still shook but no longer trembled in fear. Ash made way for lumber. Silence gave room to song. The saloon reopened with a piano that played softer now, and laughter came easier, not because things were the same, but because they had survived. Sheriff Greeley packed his things 2 weeks after the last of the Red Ridge riders were hauled off by the marshals. He didn't say much, just handed over the keys, hung his badge on a nail by the door, and rode out without looking back. No one asked where he was going. No one tried to stop him. The town needed something new, something brave. So they voted. Clara Jennings stood in the middle of the dusty street, her bandaged arms slung against her ribs, and accepted the mayor's post with no speech, just a nod. She had already proven more courage than most men combined, and now, with eyes sharp and hands still healing, she wore leadership like a second skin. The town followed her not because she demanded it, but because she had bled with them and never backed down. As for Elijah Knox, he vanished the morning after the final shot was fired. His blood trail led to the canyon, then disappeared. Some said he died in the hills. Others swore they saw him weeks later heading north with nothing but a mule and a rifle. A few believed he was never real at all, just a story, a ghost conjured from Dry Hollow's desperate prayers. But Clara knew better. She visited his cabin once. It was empty. The fire was cold, the tools put away. The bed was made. No sign of a struggle. No blood, no mess. Just absence. As if he had folded himself into the canyon wind and let it carry him away. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She stood in the doorway for a long while, ran her fingers across the rough wooden table where the note had once sat, and then turned and walked home. Years passed. Children grew up with stories about the ghost of the canyon, the sharpshooter who never missed, who brought down a dozen men with one rifle and a heart full of fire. They whispered his name like it belonged to the wind, Elijah Knox, the man who hunted death and sent it running. Fathers taught their sons how to shoot, telling them of the legend who carved a bullet with a woman's name and brought down evil for love, not vengeance. Mothers told their daughters about Clara, the woman who faced devils and made them blink first. Dry Hollow changed, not because it had to, but because it remembered. On the edge of town, where the cliffs curled inward like a secret, a boy named Matthew wandered one day, chasing the fading sun and a rusted tin can he kicked like a ball. He was 12, skinny, sunburnt, full of questions and dreams. The canyon called to him, like it had to so many others before. He reached the old trapper's cabin just as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and soft reds. The place was half swallowed by vines now, roof sagging, windows broken. Inside, dust lay thick as snow. But something pulled at him. Not fear, but curiosity, reverence. He stepped inside, heart pounding, as if entering a church. There was nothing left, except for a loose board beneath the stone hearth. He found it by accident, stepped wrong, heard the hollow creak, and knelt to pull it up. Beneath, wrapped in oiled canvas, was a rifle. Long, sleek, handcrafted. Walnut stock. Silver inlays. Across the side, etched so faint you had to squint to read it, were 4 words, for the voiceless only. Beside it, a folded slip of paper, brittle with age. The boy opened it with shaking fingers. The note said, "Use only when justice has no voice left." He stared at the rifle for a long time, not touching it, just listening. Outside, the wind stirred through the canyon, rising and falling, brushing past rock and branch like the breath of a story waiting to be told again. And so, the canyon winds still whisper his name, the trapper who was more than a man. He was a legend carved in lead,